inspirational speaker, Poppy Stowell-Evans, who is a youth climate ambassador. So I have been privileged to work with Poppy through the work that the youth climate ambassadors are doing in terms of talking about the climate anxiety that increasing numbers of young people are experiencing, talking about their own experiences and pushing for change from government and from politicians and from society. So I won't talk on Poppy's behalf. I will hand over to Poppy to talk us through climate anxiety and action. Diolch yn fawr iawn, Poppy.
Hi everyone, thank you Della for that introduction. It's been incredible to work with you over the last few months as well. Firstly, as you can tell, I am in school, so I want to apologise if there's any loud noise in the background. I think lesson changeover is just happening. But yeah, so my name is Poppy Stowell-Evans. I'm 17, I use the pronoun she, her, and I'm very, very proud to be chair of an organisation called the Youth Climate Ambassadors for Wales. Now, the Youth Climate Ambassadors for Wales are a group of 13 to 25-year-olds facilitated by Sides of Wales and the Welsh Centre of International Affairs. As a group, we have the aim of empowering accessible and unified climate action at all levels, from individuals to schools to businesses to governments and even internationally. So because of this, we have worked with a range of people, through working one-on-one with schools to help produce climate plans to even working with the US Embassy in the run-up to COP26. Now, we also want to amplify the youth voice and prove that young people not only need to care about climate change and not only do care about this, but that we also deserve a seat at the table, because ultimately climate change and climate action is going to impact every aspect of all of our lives. And it's so important that all voices are represented when these decisions are made. So while I have done a lot of climate work in this sector and a lot of climate activism, I will admit I am not trained in psychiatry. I don't even do A-level psychology. But I'm here today to talk to you about something known as climate anxiety, and I'll focus on the experiences of my peers and how that has impacted the climate activism movement. So my journey into climate activism was a little bit odd, to be honest. In fact, when my parents first started making climate conscious decisions like going vegan, I was absolutely clueless about what was going on and why they were doing it. And even, to be honest, when we started using tea leaves instead of tea bags, I started to have a little bit of a moment. I was a bit confused about what was going on in my house. Sorry, I'll let the bell go. There we go. Sorry, that was the lesson changeover. But yeah, so I was a bit clueless about what all this fuss was about. And so my mum sat me down and we did some research into climate change and the climate crisis. And within a few hours of really basic research, my mind was completely open to a perspective of the world that was changed forever. I began to realise the harsh consequences of our reckless and, to be frank, quite greedy action internationally. And it was with this, as a result of this action, that was causing the sea levels to rise, that was causing extreme flooding in parts of the world. It was our selfishness that was causing animals to become extinct and deforestation to be ravaging an integral part of our ecosystem and our life system. And this contributed to the rise in the world's temperature through a process known as global warming. Now, for my 13-year-old self, this was really overwhelming. I felt like the world was quite literally ending because of us, because of me and because of my peers, which, to be honest, isn't very far off. And this is when I first began to experience climate anxiety. It felt as though the weight of the world was on my shoulders. It was like I was let into some awful secret and I just couldn't comprehend why no one, especially world leaders, weren't panicking as much as I was. So the reason why I think that it's so important to highlight this experience and to highlight climate anxiety is because it often gets quite a bad rep by the media. Because this very much frustrates me, because when climate anxiety is channeled in the right way, it can be incredibly powerful. For me, a lot of the young activists I work with were powered by their climate anxiety to get involved in the movement. It's what drove us to start working to protect our planet and to protect future generations, because suddenly activism became more about ourselves and about our voice. It became about protecting a bigger picture. And so climate anxiety, when it is used in the right way and when people understand it, it can literally work towards changing the world, which is really vital to note. However, I do fear that climate anxiety can also have a very negative response and a very negative impact on people, because it can cause a lot of young people to feel very overwhelmed and overcome and even powerless in the face of a climate crisis. The reality of climate anxiety is that it causes a lot of people to be impacted in different ways. I know people that have had nightmares about climate change, people who feel like they can't get on with their everyday lives because the world is ending, and yet they're still expected to study subjects like maths, or they're still expected to learn how to cook and iron when temperatures are rising and animals are going extinct. Climate anxiety can sometimes make it feel like these massive world leaders are not on our side, and they're not protecting what we love and what we need to sustain and continue to live in the way we do as a human race. So it's quite easy to note that climate anxiety can really have two sides to it. However, I believe that when organisations come together to amplify the youth voice and to show young people especially that they are wanted in action, that they are needed to make effective action, then it can really give young people a place of power, and it can give young people a feeling of settlement when it comes to climate anxiety. It can make you feel as though, yes, I am in this awful position, and yes, the world is in this place, but there is still hope. And so because of this, when it comes to discussing solutions around climate anxiety and what do we do about it, because as the IPCC report showed, almost 50% of young people are now feeling the impact of climate anxiety. So when it comes to questions about how we handle this, I think the answer is simple. We handle climate anxiety by producing action to climate change, because by that, young people who are experiencing this, and even older generations, see that governments and world leaders care about their future and are working together with them in a unified way to protect it. And as the Youth Climate Ambassadors, this is something that we really like to focus on. Rather than governments and activists being separate, we want to promote a message of us unifying to solve this problem. However, especially in the run-up to COP26, it's essential that we see world leaders, our MPs, our MSs, everyone talking about this and committing to real action. Because at the end of the day, young people should not be feeling like this. The fact that we are needs to be the biggest incentive and the biggest driving motivation to produce climate action from our world leaders and governments. Unfortunately, we have seen that protecting future generations and protecting the planet doesn't quite seem to be enough to push some governments and some policymakers over the edge into a climate revolution. So what is needed now is for them to focus on today and to focus on protecting the well-being of future generations. Now, I hope that brief speech was an insight into climate anxiety and into climate activism. I'm happy to take any questions whilst I'm here. Thank you so much.
Poppy, that was absolutely wonderful. That was, if anything, it was even more powerful because you were actually speaking to us from school. I mean, just bringing that home to all of us, that you are a young person, and that you're not just talking about this theoretically, you are experiencing this. Now, we're already getting so many comments in the chat box thanking you, Poppy, and saying just how articulate that was, how inspiring it is to see young people getting involved. Now, Poppy, one of the things that I know that you've spoken about a lot before, and that I know that politicians need to grapple with, but I'm interested to hear your thoughts on what message we can be given to the practitioners who are listening today as well. The balance is so tricky, isn't it, between making sure that particularly the young people who are experiencing climate anxiety, that how this is dealt with, that it doesn't kind of poo-poo away or doesn't downplay the severity of the crisis, because that would be for one thing, it would be really unhelpful for the climate emergency, but it would also be almost like gaslighting young people and telling them that they don't have anything to feel worried about, that actually that what needs to happen is for an acknowledgement of the fact that this is a perfectly rational way to be feeling, and then through that there can be collective change. Now, I know that that's a political message rather than medical, but is that the main message that you would want to get across to the practitioners who are with us today as well?
Definitely. I think, unfortunately, kind of climate anxiety is seen a bit over dramatic. It's kind of seen as like, right, why are you panicking about the rainforest? You know, you've got bigger things to be thinking about, like your schoolwork or like your sport or like university applications. And whilst those are other key components in our life, they all add to the stress of, I guess, being a young person, as I can comment on quite accurately. But I think you're right. I think not downplaying the effect that climate anxiety has on people. So, for example, when I first started to feel my climate anxiety, I did start to feel really kind of hopeless. I used to get really frustrated with what I was learning in school, because I was kind of like, why am I learning about the French Revolution when there's literally forest fires happening right now, and when this and that is going on? So I think a key way to kind of validate that feeling is just to make sure, from a political perspective, that young people are involved in this discussion as well, and that this climate anxiety isn't a useless emotion almost. But I think almost from a psychiatrist perspective, it's really about validating it, and also, I suppose, about providing solutions, because not this doesn't happen for everyone, but I found that my anxiety was mitigated when I started to act, when I started to use my voice, because, as I mentioned earlier, I wasn't just using my voice for myself or to kind of shout about my opinions. I was using my voice because I wanted to protect a bigger issue. And I think that's really vital for young people to know, that whilst we are really at code red right now, there is still hope. And sometimes that isn't obvious when you start researching it and start learning.
Yeah, thank you so much, Poppy. And I think that message of the resilience of hope is something that has to be central to all of this. There are so many comments. I don't know if you can see them, but they'll send them to you. There's so many comments praising what you've just been saying. But one question that's come up from Nina Bentley is, what does your world look like in 2 years' time? Now Nina said, what does your world locally look like in 2 years' time? But we've just had a presentation from Ian F. Thomas from Welcome to Our Woods about the importance of connecting the community with nature. But interpret this as you will, Poppy. What do you think the world look like in 2 years' time for you as a young person? And sorry, I know that you've got to go in a couple of minutes, but that's a large question to give you, sorry.
Gosh, yeah, to be honest, the world is going to go one of two ways, in my view. And as potentially overdramatic as this sound, I think this is going to be massively dictated by what happens at COP in just over a week's time. So I think if we produce real legislative action at COP, then our world could be a really prosperous and sustainable place, both economically and socially, because when we commit to climate action and we commit to this idea of a climate revolution, then that actually helps people across a range of sectors, because climate change is going to impact our traditional industries. It already is, which means it'll impact jobs and livelihoods and well-being. So when we commit to climate action, we're actually committing to improving the livelihoods of people in Wales and across the world, especially in kind of less economically developed countries where people can't access climate action. By us taking our responsibility, we also help the well-being of life there. So I think if we commit to real action, then it means that our world is going to be more prosperous, more sustainable than it is now. And I also think it will provide an opportunity for young people to feel more empowered and to be involved in sectors of discussion that weren't accessible before. However, if we don't act, I think the next 2 years will be need to spend rapidly kind of figuring out how we're going to deal with the impact of climate change. We're at a point now where we only have a really small margin to mitigate climate change, but if we don't, then we're going to have to deal with the impact of it, and we're going to have to find solutions to managing the effects. So I think in 2 years' time, we're either going to be stepping into a really more prosperous, happier society, or we're going to be stepping into a society where we're rapidly having to overcome things like flooding, climate refugees, and having to adapt to a completely different way of life, because our current one just won't be accessible. Sorry, that was kind of like
no, don't apologize. No.
At the same time.
Poppy, that was a really fantastically succinct way of dealing with a huge question. So thank you so much. There are lots of other questions and comments, Poppy, including how people can support the Youth Climate Ambassadors and support young people. Is it all right if we send some of these comments and questions to you after the event? Because I know that gosh, you need to get to the next lesson as well. I mean,
Yes.
it's so inspirational and powerful that you've actually joined us from school. I really think that was incredibly useful and incredibly enlightening for probably everyone in this conference. Thank you so much. That was wonderful. Diolch yn fawr iawn, Poppy.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to answer any questions via email or anything like that. But yes, I have a physics test now, so I do have to run. But diolch, thank
Best of
you.
luck. Best of luck, Poppy, from everyone here. Diolch yn fawr iawn.
Diolch, thank you.
Well, that was wonderful, wasn't it? We will make sure to everyone who's put questions to Poppy that as people who I know you'll be thinking of questions that you wish that you'd asked as well to other people during the day. We'll make sure that those reflections and questions are answered. And I hope that this can set up almost a community of, we'll think of ways of working together on all of these issues, inspired by what we've heard today as well.